And now, The Allan Handelman Show.
Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull is with us.
Sitting on the park bench, eyeing little girls with bad intensity.
Ian Anderson is essentially Jethro Tull, and they have been releasing music all along since Aqualung and all their radio hits. But one thing he said he'd never do is revisit an album like Thick as a Brick and do a version 2. Well, that's what he did. Just out. It's the new Thick as a Brick 2, and they're touring. Ian, it is great to have you back on the Allan Handelman Show.
Well, nice to talk to you, too.
So let's talk about that. The release of this album kind of goes against things you have said in the past.
Well, people had suggested for many years the idea of a sequel to Aqualung or Thick as a Brick. I mean, I had that coming at me from people in the media, from fans, from record company folks, publishers, managers, agents. But you know, it didn't really appeal to me because I didn't have a vehicle that would allow me to take something like that and do it in a contemporary context, and I have no intention of visiting or revisiting in a nostalgic way something that I've done before. So it was only really in 2010 when, for the second or third time in about 5 years, someone had tried to persuade me to do a remake of Thick as a Brick, that in a conversation I wondered what might have happened to the fictitious child poet Gerald Bostock. You know, how might he have turned out in later life?
Mm-hmm.
And what might have happened to the St. Cleeve Chronicle, a 16-page fictitious newspaper that formed the packaging of the original record? And it was really those two questions that just got me kind of half thinking, and this was kind of late in 2010. And so after Christmas of 2010, I was at home for a couple of months, January, February, before I started touring again, and so I began playing with the idea and came up with a number of scenarios as to what might have happened to Gerald Bostock, and decided the way to take it forward was to look at a few of them rather than one of them, and through the mature adult, use it as a way to take a look at today's world, and in the sense of, I suppose, showing some of the contrast between 1972 and 2012, 40 years later. Many things are very different in our lives and our culture, our society. A few things, however, remain the same. And I thought this is a good way to do a sequel, to take a giant leap 40 years into the future and make a record that's about today, not about 1972. So it's a sequel, but it's not quite it's not Rocky V or Bat Out of Hell 7. It's a big step into a different, really a very different world. But you know, I kind of like the idea of toying with the way things turn out. You know, playing with the idea of choice, of fate, of the interventions that befall us along the way, and make our lives turn out perhaps quite differently from the way we sometimes imagined they would.
It's like you put it in another interview I read, if we walked on the other side of the road or picked up the phone or read an article in the newspaper, things could have changed our lives completely. Things could have changed. What would have happened, you know? And that's what this album is about in some ways.
Well, it is, and anybody could argue, well, it's a bit futile talking about what might have been.
Yeah.
You know, why bother? But I think the point is that it's really about looking at the way in which we react to chance, to fate, to intervention, and we do sometimes think it through and make a deliberate choice. Sometimes we just react in a way without thinking. Sometimes we just let things happen and we deliberately don't want to think them through. We just kind of go with the flow. But I think it's an album that allows people perhaps to maybe look back on their own lives and think not wistfully about what might have been, but maybe to better understand where they are today as a result of actions they may have been responsible for earlier on. But it's also, I think, good for people who are at that point in their lives where they are called upon to make decisions. People who are much younger, people in their teens or early 20s who are still very much at that point where they're having to make decisions about where they're headed, and this is kind of a way, I suppose, of maybe just spurring people on to taking their lives a little bit more seriously and being responsible for their actions. Some of us, I guess, even elderly people, still have a bit of life left in us, and we may yet still find that our lives may change, or things may come to us that suddenly take us somewhere else, even in the dying moments of senility. We may still head off at some tangent. Who knows?
The fictitious newspaper that came with the CD and also what came with the original album, did you create those stories out of your mind? Because I know you created a website. You have a website now that's where people can put their own fictitious stories up. Talk about that. That idea, I think, is very cool.
Well, the original album cover was written, I suppose, mostly by me, but in part by two other band members, and indeed one of the record company guys who had been a journalist on one of the smaller newspapers. So we did a fair amount of research to try and create a parochial little newspaper that was a kind of parody, I suppose, of the small town newspaper of the time. And 40 years later, well, stcleve.com is the manifestation in the internet age, and again, I did some research and looked at a lot of community online websites that were, kind of community-based newsletter type things, and took a lot of elements from there and fused some of the characters and elements of the original newspaper into the online version today. But this time around, it was just me writing it all. I didn't have any help from anybody else, so it took me about 3 weeks to do it all. And rather in an uncanny echo of the making of the original Thick as a Brick, it was 7 days rehearsal, 10 days recording, 5 days to mix and master, and about 3 weeks to do the album.
Yeah, without the limiters, without all the special processing, you wanted it like the original. You wanted it just...
Well, I wanted to work with the same sound palette. I wanted the same kind of sonic values. So I wanted to use the instruments that were the classic instruments of rock music, the Fender jazz bass, the Gibson Les Paul guitar, the Hammond organ, and then some of the quirky little things that made, I suppose, more sense for Jethro Tull, but probably didn't make a lot of sense for some of the other rock bands of the day. So you don't really find glockenspiel featuring very much in the pantheon of Deep Purple's greatest hits.
Right.
But it was an instrument we use quite often and still do today. So yeah, glockenspiel and the little acoustic parlor guitar that I play. The flute, of course, is still, relatively speaking, a very rare instrument to find in full-blown rock music.
True.
So I think we work with the same palette of sonic colors rather than the way a painter would use his favorite brushes and his favorite palette of oil paint, but you can use the same color of oil paints, and you can use the same brushes, and it doesn't mean you have to paint the same picture every time. It's the whole point. It's
the sonic fingerprint, or the essence. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, well, it just seemed to me quite a good thing to do that, and I didn't want to overutilize any of the technology. I mean, of course, we're working in the digital realm of recording and mastering and so on, but it's important to remain in control of the medium and not let it control you. There's a tendency, I think, with the convenience of a lot of digital sampling and sequencing and computer music, just to rely on the software to come up with a pleasing, if rather facile, end result. But I really wanted this to be an album, played by real men in real time, not something that was constructed in the studio. So we did play it very much and learned the music very much as an album of live music to be played live in concert.
Yeah, I love it. But
that's the way it took shape.
By the way, before we go too much further, the website that you mentioned before, would you repeat that website so people got that clear. I don't have it right in front of me. I want to make sure we got that website where you made the fictitious.
Well, the newspaper, today's St. Cleve is found at www.stcleve.com.
That's it.
And, it's simple as that, but you can find all of that just by going to jethrotull.com or iananderson.com. Takes you to the same website, and all the links are there for various things to do with the new album. And in September of this year, of course, we have the re-released Figures of Brick in its remixed form, the 5.1 surround sound version.
That's right,
and it also will be coming out as an unbundled version on iTunes, where the individual sections of music are broken down into 3 or 4 minute sections, so you can buy it in bits.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not something I have to say I really enjoyed doing, but something I had to do. And in fact, only yesterday I was approving the segmented version of the original Thick as a Brick that was edited at Abbey Road and in London, Abbey Road Studios, and it kind of is what it is. It's broken up into bits. But I had to do that back in 1972 anyway for radio in the USA. We released some versions of the album which were only for radio, special edition just for radio, which was broken into individual tracks so that radio stations could play bits of the album without there being an awful nasty noise when they lifted the needle on and off the record player, because that's how it happened back then. You really did have a record player with a stylus and a tone arm and a turntable, and you had to be pretty careful how you did it, otherwise it was a bit messy.
I know, and if you cue a record too many times, I remember because I did it. I mean, when you cue a record, you get cue burns if you don't have the right vinyl, the right quality vinyl, and there's a lot of things. You have a tour, of course. The tour is something that I know you're very excited about. But last year you toured and you did Aqualung, kind of a 40th anniversary for Aqualung. That went really well. Is any of the music from that tour available?
Well, not in the sense of it being a live recording. No,
right.
I mean, we actually did Aqualung as a live recording about 2005 or 6 when we did that. Mm-hmm. But it was we did a live tour of all of Aqualung being played on stage, and we released a limited edition for charity, for essentially charities for the homeless, which the band were kind enough, if somewhat reluctantly, able to donate their services, and so we put the royalties to good use from that. But I mean, we've been there, done that, and last year was just, I suppose, being the 40th anniversary, we focused on the Aqualung album, not with the same, perhaps, dedication as we did 6 years, 7 years ago.
Sure.
But, at least to the point of making that the focus of a couple of tours in Europe and the USA. But, this year is a different year, and here we are doing a much more theatrical and production-oriented tour with a lot of audiovisual stuff and additional performers on the stage, as you will see. So it's kind of more of a theatrical music concert, music theater, rather than just simply being a rock concert.
Yeah, one of my favorite songs on the on this new Thick as a Brick 2 is Old School Song. I don't know why. I like that one. I like Give Till It Hurts. I like Shunt and Shuffle, which has that flavor that's classic Jethro Tull, classic Ian Anderson. Just some of the cuts. You want to talk about any of those songs specifically so we can roll them?
Well, there are elements of music within the album. I mean, I don't really think of them so much as songs, but what happens is that there are about five sort of manifestations of the Gerald Bostock as he might be today. So there's 5 sort of characters we focus on, 5 possible outcomes for his life, and there are also about 5 themes, musically speaking, in the album, and they keep cropping up in a different guise. So there are elements of some of these songs where certain harmonic sequences will appear several times on the album, so melodies appear and reappear. It's much more of it was written clearly in a way that made it easier to break up for the modern alternative of buying individual pieces to download on iTunes or Amazon.
I see.
But at the same time, I didn't want to have any actual digital silence on the record, so one piece flows into another.
I see, that's
all
right.
The reiterations and redevelopments of themes make it very much a similar experience to the original Thick as a Brick. It's just I really wanted to record the album in a way where that you could just take a hint of a breath. But if you can't hear any digital silence on the record. There is no place where there is not sound for 53 minutes and some seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we talk about songs or tracks in the sense that there are ID points on the CD where people can skip from one bit to another, it is continuous music, and with a lot of reiterations of themes and melodies. And so some of the things you just mentioned, some of those ideas, tunes, lyrical references, they crop up all over the place on the album. It's quite a jigsaw puzzle of elements that lock into place.
Just a couple more things, just to check my notes here. Do I have about 5 more minutes? I don't want to keep you. Okay, very cool. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your feeling about the audience. In 2000, when we spoke, I believe it was 2000, we talked about how the audience has changed and how you're seeing a lot of young people in there. Of course, you're seeing a lot of the older people who grew up loving your music, and a lot of kids. But now here we are, 2012. What are some of the differences you might have observed, Ian? Or is it typically the same? Maybe it hasn't changed. I don't,
I think it depends largely on what time of the year it is. Is it indoors, outdoors? Is it a traditional concert hall with plush seats? Is it an Art Deco cinema converted into being a theater? Is it a festival kind of atmosphere? Is it outside in a warm city square somewhere in northern Italy, like I will be playing in a couple of nights from now? Or is it a stifling theater in the middle of Milan where I was playing 2 weeks ago? I mean, the same audience will behave completely differently, regardless of national stereotypes, regardless of what flag they happen to be under. It's always very tempting to talk about audiences as if they are some kind of generic whole, but in fact, audiences are just a large group of individuals, and I try to remind myself that when I'm playing to any audience, anytime, anywhere, that it's lots of individual people out there.
That's right.
Not to brand them as being a Philadelphia audience, or a Santiago, Chile, or audience. I try and keep in mind that they're all just people, and regardless of perhaps their normal way of behaving, they will adapt very much to the specifics of a concert venue, the time of the year, the crucial elements, indoors, outdoors versus seated and standing audiences. Those make much bigger differences than whether or not you're playing to people in New York or in New Delhi.
Yeah.
I mean, it's frankly not such a big difference in terms of people. If you put them all in the same kind of environment, it's very hard to make out who's who. And also, that is the reality of perhaps playing in certain countries like my own, where the audience is very mixed. You're going to see people from all over the human divide. They're going to be there. People of multi-faith, multi-ethnic. They're all everybody's from somewhere else.
It's funny. You hit it on the head, because I know there are people in my business who sometimes look at an audience as flashing lights on a phone panel. You have to think of individuals when you speak, and and what your answer makes perfect sense, because I think people sometimes they just generalize as a city.
We're all too easily demographically driven, because we tend to want to have a little an easy way to describe who it is we're reaching out to and who they are in a sort of a mean average way. But there's obviously a danger in doing that, and I think perhaps the biggest two divides that I see, don't have to do with language or religion or color of skin. They have actually to do, first of all, with gender, and happily for me and Jethro Tull, it's always been pretty much boy, girl, boy, girl. A lot of bands, particularly the heavier rock bands, where it's boy, 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 girl, boy, boy, girl, boy, 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 and a sea of black T-shirts.
Yeah, I experienced that for the first time, and I guess it was in the early '80s. I went to a Rush concert, and it was about 10-to-1 ratio. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So happily, that's not been the case for us. We've always had we've always been seen as being a female-friendly band in the sense that even though most of the fans are male, they don't feel awkward about bringing their girlfriend or their wife to the show, and so that's always been a good thing. But there's very much mixed gender. The other thing is that in terms of age group, we started off in our earliest years of playing, 68, 69, with really quite a mature audience, and did one of the first concerts we ever played in the USA. We were playing, to the audience for Blood, Sweat and Tears, who were mostly older than we were, and we played at the Newport Jazz Festival, where probably the average age of the audience was nearly double ours. So,
sure.
We had a rather more mature audience from the word go, and it was always a mixture between people, teenagers, sometimes too young to really be in the venues they came to, but it's always been pretty mixed, and I think that's something that always appeals to me, is that it's been a mixture of age groups and mixed gender, and I rather like the idea that you can appeal across the board in that kind of a way, and so these days, happily, we do have a reasonable manifestation of younger fans of progressive rock and of our band in particular, but I'm sure we share their affiliation with a whole bunch of other groups that they're interested in, whether they're contemporary progressive rock or progressive metal bands, or they're just there for the kind of curiosity of learning more about the bands that their parents' generation listened to.
And I think most people, a lot of times the kids are afraid to tell their friends they like certain kinds of music. They like to keep the image. They're a metalhead, so they only like metal But I think all of us have musical tastes that maybe you don't tell everybody about. As you talk about the individual, a lot of metalheads probably have a mellow side to them.
Sure. Well, there are definitely a lot of closet Tull fans out there who probably be very reluctant to host a barbecue for their neighbors and be seen wearing a Jethro Tull T-shirt. But the Jethro Tull T-shirt's actually pretty good for barbecues, and it does set the tongue wagging. Oh God, you don't like them, do you? So it's always a bit of a laugh. But I think there are lots of. I'm often surprised to hear and read of people, that most unlikely people, who are Jethro Tull fans, and it crops up with amazing regularity.
Oh, true.
In my life.
Just talking to you today from people who I wouldn't normally expect to be fans of Jethro Tull, and they were. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. I want to spend, because this is a side of you that I really enjoyed exploring, and I want to end on this note. The human relationship with animals. I know one of the things we talked about is cats, and how communicating with a cat, like when they close their eyes slowly and squint, that kind of says "I love you." And birds, all of that. I'd love you to share your thoughts and things that you believe in that relationship.
I think there are people who have strong relationships with animals because they're not very good at dealing with people. I know quite a few people like that who are much more at home with their relationships with their pets, or perhaps in a more idealistic way, their interest in wildlife conservation or whatever may be a bit of a substitute for the fact they're not really very comfortable or confident in their relationships with people. There are definitely folks like that, and some of them professionally involved in the world of animals, conservation, whatever. Some of them just folks who like to stay at home with a pet cat or dog or snake or whatever it might be. But I I think most of us probably aren't that extreme. We like animals, but we also like people. And I rather think there is a good relationship between the way in which you learn to communicate with animals that you can use in a way to increase your skills at interfacing with your human counterparts as well. And perhaps vice versa, in the sense that you realize from your human relationships how easily you can offend, how you can hurt, how you can create jealousy, how anger and other rather negative emotions can take their toll on human relationships. Well, of course, they also do with animals, and you've got to be terribly careful if you have a number of animals around, as we do, not to make them jealous of each other. You've got to be very even in your affiliation and sensitive in the way that you spread your love, your communication with them. And I think there's a lot of good parallels, really, between relationships with animals and relationships with people. You can use it in a very positive way to learn more about how to get on with those around you, be they four-legged, two-legged, or three-legged.
How many animals do you have? How many dogs do you have, or cats?
Well, my wife has 2 dogs. I have 5 cats.
Oh man, that's great.
I'm a cat guy. She's likes cats, but she particularly likes the dogs, and I kind of don't mind dogs up to a point, but they're not my favorite animal. But of course, over the years, we've had lots of other animals. Sometimes animals that we were less personally involved with, like having a couple of thousand sheep and a head of cattle, and also any one time probably I was a proud owner of about 2 million Atlantic salmon.
That's right.
That's right.
We talked about that.
So I've had a lot of involvement with animals, both as a farmer and as in the sense of having animals around the house. And I'm not a great meat eater, which is why I've always found it rather difficult to be involved in livestock farming. It's just something doesn't really quite gel with me.
Right. You gave it a shot. And when we talked about this the first time, The Secret Language of Birds was the release, and it's amazing. Whatever question Ian Anderson gets, he comes out with a compelling answer and just fascinating. Your energy on stage, playing 2 hours, the what you continue to produce just has a lot of people just excited and motivated and kind of inspired to change things in their own lives, especially those who think it's too late, it's over, I'm old. You really reinvigorate people.
Well, I think most people in their dotage, have perhaps more in them than they realize, and it's very good time, I think, once you get into your 50s and into your 60s to realize that you can still be very creative and you can still undertake new projects, whatever they might be. It's never too late to learn a new skill, and certainly music is one of those areas where you don't have to be bound. I mean, it's probably a bit too late to take up professional lawn tennis or to become a Formula One racing driver, when you're in your 50s or 60s, but you can certainly learn from a standing start to become a musician. Mm-hmm. And lots of people do take up music later in life and find a huge reward in developing a latent talent, a latent skill that they can derive a huge amount of pleasure from. And whether it's painting, writing, music, the creative arts are a great outlet for not only passing a few hours happily doing something constructive, but actually for exercising the brain and exercising the mind in a way that I think can stave off the inevitable senility for quite a bit longer. So people who are actively engaged in creative pursuits, I think, do tend to live more productive and probably rather more cogent lives. There's nothing more damaging to health, I think, than ending up like certainly my parents, and I know the parental generation of many of my contemporaries, who just sat there staring at the television until the lights went out.
You don't want that to happen. That's right.
Sad. Absolutely. And I think it is important as you get older to try to challenge yourself with some new projects and new things to do, and that's indeed what I do. Happily, I'm a professional. I get to do it and get paid for doing it, but even if I wasn't getting paid, I think I'd still be, well, arguably, you see, making an album like this in this day and age is a bit of a, doing it for love rather than money, because the most I've ever anticipated was just about to sell enough records to make back in royalties the cost of making the record, and
isn't that amazing?
Anything more than that would be a huge bonus. But of course, records these days don't sell like they did 20 or 40 years ago. So you have to think quite carefully about why it is you're doing something, and money can't be the object. You have to do it because you actually want the challenge and you want the satisfaction of doing it and doing it well. That's got to be the primary driver. Any economic benefit is just icing on the cake.
All right. Well, man, I always enjoy talking to you. Here's the website, stcleve.com, for anything about Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson.
Yeah, or it's easier than that. Just go jethrotull.com.
There you go.
You'll find links to everything else in my life there, including you can go to Gerald Bostock's Facebook page and read what Gerald Bostock is up to today, because he's actually become the tour manager for my band and crew on tour, and so he's writing every couple of weeks, writing his diary about what life on the road is all about, which is new to him because he's a retired politician in the context of his ramblings on his Facebook page. But
very cool.
Yeah, we're having a little fun with all of it.
Cool.
Hopefully, our audience will too.
Yeah.
Very nice to talk to you, and take care. We'll see you in America in September, October, November of this year.
Thank
and
you.
Again in 2013, because we're back for another 2 tours in 2013 as well.
Hey.
So we're busy boys.
I hope to be talking to you again in 2013. Thank you for being on the Allan Handelman Show again, Ian.
Take care. We'll talk soon.
Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. That was the abbreviated edition of the interview. You can get the full interview on my YouTube page, YouTube/Allan Handelman. See you next week, everybody.
So long, Allan Handelman, in North Carolina, that's all, folks.